Welcome to Ethics in Administrative Justice, our webinar series put on through a collaboration between SOAR and Osgood's Professional Development. I'm Lawrence Sawson, Dean of Osgood Hall Law School, and it's my absolute pleasure to be moderating this session. And this session will be devoted to mentoring, collegiality, and performance, critically important issues in the life of administrative justice, but also issues in which there are a number of ethical judgments to make. And our topic today will not be about finding particular rules or statutes which apply to a particular problem or offering legal advice on what to do if confronted by it, but rather we're aiming to think through ethical judgments and the decision-making process, to look at the context within which those ethical judgments are made, and also to hear from some expert panelists who've been serving in a variety of capacities in administrative justice, from members all the way up to chair and leadership positions, to see how, based on that experience, that expertise, they confront the issues that come up in very much real-world situations. We'll talk about some dilemmas that are ones you won't see every day, but also ones that it would be rare in the life of a chair not to come across. As I said, we're joined by the three people you would most want to hear from on this topic. I'm going to turn to them in a moment and ask each to introduce a little bit about their background and experience, but let me first tell you who they are. We're joined by Linda Tanaka, who is the Executive Chair of Environment and Land Tribunals Ontario. We're joined by Gary Yee, who is the Interim Executive Chair of Safety, Licensing Appeals and Standards Tribunals Ontario. Welcome. And Suzanne Gilbert, who is the Associate Chair, Child and Family Services, which is in the Social Justice Tribunals Ontario cluster. And having got all of those more or less right, I feel my job is done. Let me turn first to Linda to say a little bit about your background and the perspective you bring to the discussion today.
Well, I practiced law, as you know, for about 30 years. And I was in a firm where collegiality was very valued. And
I'm sure it felt like only 27.
Oh, it did. It only felt like 27. I was mentored generously as the first woman hired in the firm. And it was the expectation that as a senior person in the firm, you also mentored. And in the public service, I was mentored by Stanley Sadinsky, who was chair of the Ontario Racing Commission when I was vice chair. Then I became a chair of the Ontario Racing Commission, and then I went to the License Appeal Tribunal, which is now part of SLASTO, as chair, and I was the only full-time OIC. So there were all these part-time members to be mentored and brought along. And then finally I went to ELTO as the executive chair, where collegiality is a value that is strongly embedded in the culture.
So from ELTO to SLASTO, Gary.
Yes, well, I've been involved in the tribunal world on a full-time basis for about 20 years now, and in many different capacities, as staff, as a part-time member previously, as chair of 3 different tribunals, federally and provincially. So I've seen my share of scenarios and situations that involve these issues, and it is never boring in the tribunal world, that's for sure, never.
And on that note, Suzanne, tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, I started as a member at the Immigration and Refugee Board in '96, and I was there for 10 years. So as a member, as a coordinating member, and as an assistant deputy chair, leading the office in Toronto here, which is the larger office in Canada, the larger region. Then I was appointed chair of the Child and Family Services Review Board and Custody Review Board in 2006. And now I am the associate chair of the same board within the Social Justice Tribunal of Ontario.
Well, welcome to each of you and to all of you. The discussion, again, will be free-flowing on some points I've shared with you in advance, but I'm looking forward to having you jump in on any point that catches your imagination. And we wanted to start with, I think, the foundation for much of the discussion to come, which is how to foster collegiality in one of the diverse settings of administrative justice. And the diversity of settings can, of course, be the lifeblood of collegiality. It can be a barrier to collegiality. And I'm especially thinking on tribunals that have a number of part-time members who won't all be in the room on the same day very often, who may, again, come with disparate kinds of expertise, background, generation, culture, and expectations of the tribunal in their role. So, Gary, let me start with you on how in that kind of culture, collegiality can and should be fostered and what's worked in your experience.
Right. Well, I think the difference between having part-time members mostly and having, let's say, mostly full-time members, that's a difference that needs to be emphasized more. I don't think it's talked about enough. And certainly the tribunals now in the tribunal cluster I'm in, SLASTO, as well as the Licensed Appeal Tribunal, is over 90% part-time members. And that really poses some challenges when you're trying to foster collegiality. I think in the end, it's all about communications and contact. It's about engagement. So how do you engage part-time members who may only do a few hearings for you a year in some cases? And nowadays with technology, communications is much easier. So emails, more frequent emails. We have monthly conference call meetings so that on the telephone we can all get together. We send out regular bulletins. We've also tried to create subgroups so that members can identify more with members doing specific case types within the tribunal, and maybe try and meet as subgroups rather than as a tribunal of 35 members. So those are sorry. Those are the various things that can be done. Something we've tried recently also is to try and get aiming for we have a project where we aim for 10% of our hearings to be done by two-member tribunals and two-member panels, and that also promotes collegiality. It really gives people a chance to work with other members and take away from some of the isolation you might feel as a part-time member.
Great. Suzanne, let me turn to you, and you've obviously seen another dimension of collegiality, which is a certain intensity in the subject area of the adjudication itself. And these are situations where we know isolation can lead to anxieties and challenges as a tribunal member. How do you counter that isolation? How do you foster collegiality among members or in tribunals that you've seen in other contexts?
Well, I think that when you have full-time members, you have an advantage because, as you said, everybody's there generally every day, and you have a chance to establish a rapport with them and encourage them to go talk to their colleagues and create an atmosphere where there's some exchange. When you have part-time member, as Gary said, it's very, very, very different. The isolation is a danger in a way, so you have to find ways of bringing them together. So what I did when I started at the CFSRB was to try to have annual meeting 2 or 3 times, to have general meeting 2 or 3 times a year. Of course, there's money involved in budget involved in that. So, but we were trying our best to be able to do that. And the monthly call is also a way of achieving some collegiality. The advantage I have is that the quorum of the board for many, many years was 3-member panel. And a panel of 3 members give you a chance to, when you assign the cases, to create a panel where they will, through a year, have a chance to sit pretty much with each other and learn from each other. And I could say that I've seen some support being developed through this exercise. Members calling each other on the phone to address some issues and when they had to face another difficult decision along the way. So that was a way. We are now having a quorum of 1 member, but I still have the opportunity to assign 1, 2, 3. So I think it's a good tool.
I think you've also introduced a dynamic that we'll hear more about, which is how collegiality, which we know to be a good thing, also turns in some cases on challenges of resource allocation, of having scarce funds, let's say, to bring everyone together. Can you have just a social event? Well, on the one hand, we know collegiality is fostered by getting together when it's not about work, but can that be justified to taxpayers when it's public dollars in this accountability environment? So as I think through the challenge of, in a sense, innovation in collegiality, it's how to foster it in a meaningful way within those constraints that especially chairs and executive chairs live within. And Linda, you know a thing or two about the constraints, but also a thing or two now about the additional challenges within a cluster of finding collegiality, not just within boards, but between boards that have been brought together in this way, sometimes with people who know each other well, sometimes with people who never would have run into each other but for this clustering. So Linda, what's your thought on fostering collegiality?
Well, let me just go back to what Suzanne said about with full-time members being able to have them in the office. The reality is that most of my full-time members are not in the office. They are home officed. And in that way, we have people all over the province. We minimize the travel costs, hopefully, and reflect the very specific regional differences that there are in Ontario with respect to what the needs of the community are and the very specific identities that are there. For instance, when you get into valuation issues, the valuation issues in different communities is a real challenge. So if you go with a Southern Ontario mentality to Northern Ontario, you're in trouble. So I want to emphasize that just because you're full-time doesn't mean that as a member you don't suffer from that isolation and that you have lots of opportunities. In terms of the clusters, both my predecessor at Alto and I have tried very hard to bring the members together to what I'll call a mass meeting, a large meeting on the quarterly basis where they have to deal together in solving a particular problem. They all have common problems. They're all asked to do the 3 things. People have heard me say this before: run a fair hearing, make the right decision, and write it up well.
That sounds easy.
And it sounds very easy, but they're all of the tribunals, except one I have, which is all mediation, they all have those same challenges. So when you put them together, they can help each other. And the strength of one becomes the strength of all, is the theory of clustering. So in our case, no, they didn't have really reason to know each other. There were a couple who were on the OMB who had been on the assessment review board, but in terms of day-to-day relationships and understanding the business that the others have, no, they didn't really have a good understanding. So they started, my predecessor started with a very strong code of conduct, which defined collegiality in a particular way. It made it a major heading, and ignorance creates barriers and knowledge breaks them down. And that's been the theory that we've had. We've had events where we've trained people on new areas that they've had to cope with, whether through rule changes or new law, by using members of other tribunals to come in who are more familiar with the area. And so that encourages respect. And it encourages just the very simple, hi, how are you, passing to say hello, which is one of the things that will break down isolation.
So let me ask a quick follow-up on that. I'll give each of you a chance just to share an experience if you've had one. Is in person the only way to really foster that kind of collegiality? And this comes back to the question about cost and dynamics of how to innovate in a climate of restraint. Can you achieve the same collegial goals through a conference call, through video conferencing, or through social media, through other kinds of intranets? And I say this in part in the midst of a webinar that we hope is able to stimulate thinking in the way that coming to a CLE session or coming to a conference could, and I think there are bound to be upsides and downsides, but have you seen a successful collegial enhancing event or initiative technology-based?
Well, all of us do the teleconferences, and let's go to the root of the issue. If you're a leader within one of these tribunals, you have to model the behavior. So if you're concerned about undermining collegiality by an inappropriate reaction, you can do that on the teleconference just as easily as you can do it in person. And we all will be tempted to cross the line. Some of us may cross the line, and then you have a lot of repair damage to be done. There's no question that on a teleconference, people can be just as rude as they can in person. And that undermines collegiality. You can get the same comments that indicate a lack of respect for each other. So it can work, but you can't put I don't think you can put the whole burden of creating a culture on a teleconference. But I don't think any of us are talking about creating a culture. I think it's a question of maintaining a culture. The members are senior, accomplished people, most of them with thousands of hours of community service as volunteers that depended on working well with people. So when you start with that group, with those values, you are maintaining rather than creating, I think.
I think that's a good distinction, and maybe the best mix is where one creates with lots of in-person engagement, but can foster and maintain with these additional enhancements. But have you seen a technological innovation that has enhanced collegiality in that way?
Right. Well, I mean, we all see the future. We all see the ways that may work to have video conferencing or use technology, but most of us are nowhere close, if only because of resources or just what the tools we have to work with. I'll mention something very basic, very simple, just using email. And email nowadays is ancient for a lot of young people, but for older people, email is still our primary means of electronic communication, especially in the business world. At the Licensed Appeal Tribunal, staff had taken to BCC, put everyone in the BCC list so nobody could see anybody's email as a concern over privacy. And one of the first things I did in my first week there was, I don't get any sense of the tribunal when I see no names there on this email that supposedly goes to everyone.
Right.
So immediately we put 35, we sent around emails saying, do you mind? Nobody, and then we put 35 names in there, and we started getting reply alls. I mean, you can have too much email, but at the same time that created the sense of belonging, the sense of one group that just was not there when the names weren't there.
That's very helpful. And Suzanne, is there a digital collegiality that mirrors but is somewhat different than in person, or have you had experiences that shed light on what the future might hold?
Well, I'm a strong believer that in-person contact is the best way to create collegiality. But we have conference call, and I'm not sure that this is the best tool to create collegiality. Even video conferencing, where I've seen that used with the staff, not with the members so far, and I'm not sure. So if you start with a board where there's already a strong sense of collegiality and belonging, you can add those layers. But if you are in a position where you have, for example, to start a new board, or you have an influx of half of your membership is new, conference calls and video conferencing won't do it, I think. There's a difference between communicating and collegiality. You can send emails to everybody. This could bring a sense of being part of a larger organization, which is good. You can achieve that this way. But do you really create collegiality this way? I have seen recently exchange of peer review of decision and in a tribunal. And, I could see through emails, just to say the contrary of what I just said, I could see through emails some comments and some suggestion on the decision. And, you know, there was very interesting conversation and exchange there. Does it give a feeling to those members that they are working together? Maybe, because there's a discussion on certain points. But still, the best way for me is an in-person. Maybe it's old-fashioned. I don't know, but it's still for me.
No,
the best way.
it's interesting when I mentioned upsides and downsides. You know, it's well known that people will also, coming back to courtesy and that aspect of collegiality, be less civil in emails than they might be in person. On the other hand, emails, even conference calls, give rise to having a record of interactions, which from a standpoint of ethical oversight can be preferable to in person where no third party was present and it's very hard to determine what was said or in what context. So we're not going to solve this, you know, in one way or the other around what the future holds, but I think it's fair to say that digital collegiality is going to emerge as just as important, if it hasn't already, as the desire to build or to establish those relationships to begin with. So to see what this looks like when the challenge or the dilemma arises, we have a scenario to put to the three of you and welcome insights on how you would address it. And I'll lay it out for you since it's brief, and this should be appearing on the screen for those watching. Randolph Sweetman has recently been appointed to your tribunal, and prior to his appointment, he was an advocate for many of the vulnerable applicants who bring their issues to your tribunal. There's no doubt that his professional background and experience favored his appointment, but during his orientation, and in particular on the basis of some remarks he's made at the first full board meeting, it's clear that he continues to think like the advocate he was before getting his OIC appointment. How would you address the issue raised by Sweetman in terms of an overall perspective, voice, or lens through which to view the work of the tribunal, continuing to see it from an advocate's point of view? And Linda, maybe I'll start with you this time.
Okay, so when I was reading over this problem, I had a couple of questions, naturally.
I can't imagine why. All the facts
it's so
are laid out.
clear.
There's no detail left unaddressed.
So is Mr. Sweetnam a lawyer, or is he, for instance, a social worker? Or what is the framework of understanding that he comes to the tribunal with? If an advocate, he was a policy advocate working with ministry, or to advocate before ministries, government officials. That's one perspective. If he was an advocate as a lawyer actually appearing before the board, that's a different perspective. If we have someone who is what lawyers like to call lay people, then what we need to address, I think, here is the basic concepts of bias and fairness and the two sides to every story, at least two sides to every story, and what fairness means in the context of independent decision-making and impartiality as between the parties. And that's sort of the easier part of the problem, because if you have someone who arrives without those fundamental elements of adjudication, then there are lots of tools you have to bring that around. If, on the other hand, you have someone who comes in and wants to really straighten out this board, that there have been too many decisions made against the vulnerable people, then it's a more difficult conversation. It's actually one you should have at the time of candidacy. You need to have that conversation at the time you have the candidate.
So assuming, though, that that wasn't apparent or didn't happen, in other words, that it's really through the orientation that this came to light. Orientation has happened, so one presumes that will include the background on impartiality and also independence.
Yeah.
Is it then a conversation with the chair or executive chair one-on-one? Is there some other way to more indirectly raise the question? And again, the anxiety often is, having just talked about independence and the importance of your judgment calls, does it undermine that to say, I'm going to take you aside based on things I heard you say, and question, in a sense, what could be taken to be someone's independence right out of the gate before there's been a context of work. So I think operationalizing those instincts presents a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, I think you start with the panel, making sure the new member sits as a panel member so that they have an experienced member by their side as they go into the hearing and as they listen to the evidence and come to a decision. And frequently there is an awakening, shall we say. I hate to use the word epiphany, it's overused.
But a light bulb of some kind.
A light bulb of some kind goes on when the full majesty of the role comes to the fore. So the use of panels, I think careful monitoring by the chair, even sitting in on some of the early hearings, debriefing with the senior member of the tribunal. Some tribunals have actually mentor sheets that they require the senior member to fill out to ensure that there are some checkboxes, there are some traceable methods of identifying these skills. So that's where you start. And if after trying your best to make sure that the emphasis is on impartiality and independence and neutrality and evidence-based tribunal decisions, you still have a problem, then it does come to a one-on-one meeting.
All right, and Gary, on this front, we're assuming it's a good thing to intervene and, kind of beat the advocacy out of an early member. Is that always the right approach? In other words, the advocacy may be a big part of the passion that an individual brings to the subject area. And is the message we're sending by doing what I think made a lot of sense to me as Linda was laying it out, saying, that in a sense we don't have confidence in your ability to distinguish between that passion and this role? Do we wait and see what the track record is in decisions before intervening, or is it as early as possible the right move to intervene?
In a situation like this, I think it's important to intervene early. Impartiality is that's at the root of what people expect from tribunals. And this example does illustrate, of course, the conflicting expectations that people have about tribunals, that we want people there with expertise, with a background, be responsive to society, and yet at the same time we expect them to be completely impartial. So we have to work with that, and we have to value the background and experience and viewpoints that the member brings. We don't approach things with a blank slate. It's more important that we are aware of our feelings and our opinions and use that in the process of impartial adjudication. To me, this is really about what do you do with somebody's blind spot, in the sense of this may be something he's not aware of. How does this appear to his colleagues when he makes comments like this? What implications will it have for the public, for the credibility of him and more broadly his tribunal, if he makes decisions with reasons that appear to not be impartial? And so, these are all capable members who are appointed through a selection process. Once they're told the implications, hopefully they accept that and they can modify their behavior and their thinking processes as well.
So Suzanne, let me make it a bit tougher on you to say, let's assume this conversation has happened in one context or the other, and the response of someone is, look, I was appointed because of who I am. This is who I am, and I'm not about to change my stripes in this role. This is the most important place to make a difference, and that's what I was appointed to do. And I'm a package. I can't just remove my convictions, and nor would I be true to myself if I did. How do you respond to that kind of member, especially in a new context before the relationship is very well developed?
Well, I think that I would be clear on the fact that his experience and his passion is a value for the board. I wouldn't try to minimize that. but I would clearly say that there's expectation when you are a member. And being impartial is, of course, essential. It's part of the job. So it's part of the job description. And I will invite this person to reflect on how to change the hat. And this is something I address all the time in training of new members, because we have lawyers, but we have also people from the social work field, and we have a lot of passionate people about children. So the question is, I will ask you to reflect on that, how you can use this passion and this experience in your work, and at the same time ensure that you will hear both sides and come to a fair decision. And say that that's the way it has to be. There's no other way, and I would follow up. And I would follow up with, I would read the decision. If it sits in panel of more than one, I would try to listen about what's going on. I don't want to look like I'm making an inquiry and I'm always on the back of this member, but I would certainly, as Linda said, I would follow up to see how it goes.
So this lends itself to a segue to the next area we're exploring, which is mentorship. Mm-hmm. So in that context, but also generally, because everyone will come with their own package of assets and personality dynamics and experience. Yeah. How do you manage mentorship in that way? Is it something that you identify this person is going to need someone or a process to kind of guide them into this role? Is it something that every new member is assigned, and is it a formal mentorship program with an individual identified who will play that role for a new member? Or is it just an informal network that will respond as issues arise? What in your context works best to foster mentorship?
Well, it's a little bit of both. As I said, when you have a panel of 3 members, first of all, you assign a new member with a very experienced member. So and you can have more than one hearing. I don't have a board where you have a hearing in the morning and in the afternoon. Was before in the past, but so sitting with colleagues who are experienced, they develop a relationship, and these people, these members who are experienced, can give guidance to the new member. So that's one way. I have, at this stage, with our board, for example, for mediation, our settlement facilitation program, the new member will be mentored by one experienced mediator. Will receive the training, will observe the mentor, will do mediation, will be observed by the mentor. So for this type of work, I have a very specific way of mentoring because it's a one-on-one. And I was with the board before, where I was with the RB. Well, there was a clear program of mentorship. So you had a member assigned to a mentor for 6 months, and they were going through all the work, the issues in the hearing room and how to write a decision, which was a very good system when you have the capacity to do it. So how to assign the right member to the right mentor? You need to find the good ingredients to make the perfect recipe, And for example, depending on if you can identify some of the weaknesses of the new member, you can couple them with the strength of a mentor. Will I assign a lawyer with a non-lawyer mentor? It will depend on the circumstances. If you have someone coming from the social work field who has no experience as an adjudicator, maybe you need to assign this person to a lawyer or to a person who has the same background but with a lot of experience as adjudicator.
Well, let me kind of press what can be the challenge, and again, what sounds like the right approach, have an experienced member with a new member. And Gary, this is a good one for you because you've been in lots of situations of change and transition in tribunals, where often you're looking to chart a new path, or there's been a sense of a new direction, whether coming from government or institutionally. And so what you don't want necessarily is incoming members to learn bad habits or to learn previous ways of thinking. You want to foster that culture of it's a new day, How does mentorship change when that's the imperative that you're working under, which, again, as someone who's been in as many situations as you have, I know is something you've seen. Assuming the steady state best course of action is experience to junior, is there a different way of thinking when there's a change mandate afoot?
Well, that does pose something different, but really in the end, I think mentorship is more about about training and professional development. When it comes to change management, you need a particular set of circumstances to be able to rely on a sufficient number of mentors, as opposed to, let's say, member managers or the leadership, the chairs, the chair or vice chairs to lead that change. Certainly, you need support within the members, and it helps to have that critical mass of support of senior and or influential members to support that change. But what this does highlight, though, is also in most tribunals the very ad hoc nature of membership of mentorship. At the Immigration and Refugee Board, as Suzanne said, there was a very good, rigorous mentorship system, and I think it worked well. But I would say mentorship is still very much an ad hoc thing in most tribunals. It requires, it requires an extra time and effort, and but it's worth it. It requires resources, but it's an investment in the member.
And so, Linda, how do you value mentorship in that way? And I think Gary's raised an interesting point that it can often be the thing when you have time at the end of the day you turn to, rather than equated with decision writing or even engagement in formal training. Is it perceived as an add-on? How do you address that perception so that it is valued as a core activity, so that it's not just ad hoc in the way Gary suggested it can be?
Well, I think members will, whether they're vice chairs or members, will first look and say, I'm paid to be in a hearing room and to make decisions. What does this have to do with that? And is that how I'm going to be assessed in my performance? So you have to embed mentorship into the assessment process so that people who do well at it understand that it reflects well on them and helps them advance if they want to advance. I think in the Alto cluster, the mentoring was embedded in the culture of the Assessment Review Board in a structured way, and the mentors were trained and identified. And on a weekly sheet I get, there's the different qualifications of members, and their assignment to cases is summarized with some letters. But mentoring is one of the ones that's included in there and regarded as important as a substantive area knowledge. And
would you say it's similar in that sense? Not everyone is a decision writer. Some may be great in a hearing.
Absolutely.
Is not everyone cut out to be a mentor?
Not everyone is cut out to be a mentor. Not everyone has the patience. You get personalities that are very different. I think what really is at the root of effective mentoring on both the mentor and the mentee's part is a fundamental understanding that if you screw up, it reflects badly on the board, and you have
Right.
a commitment to the board. I mean, underpinning all of it is this sense of we want to do the best job we can, not just for the parties, but because of the board's integrity, the perception of the board as doing its job and doing it well.
So you've touched on valuing things through the assessment process, and the next scenario I want to put to you is about an assessment process that raises a challenge, and I think one of you at least has identified this already, of the gap between self-perception and the perception of others, and how to bridge that in a way that is conducive to collegiality, and mentorship, of course, can be a big part of that. So again, let me read out the scenario, and it's brief. A part-time member named Filomena Hurtado has been with a mid-sized tribunal for approximately 6 months. She's indicated availability for approximately 4 hearing days a month, and has been assigned for only 2 hearing days a month. Her performance has been adequate, although she has struggled with her attempts to write decisions. She's been described by colleagues as nice but standoffish, and after her first performance review, She indicated to the chair that she felt it was unfair that she was not given more hearing times, and she believed that this was due to the fact she spoke with an accent and was not white. So in this kind of scenario, and again, assume you're the chair, Suzanne, who she has brought this to, how do you manage both the substantive concern and what it says about a general orientation to the board, or a general sense of being part of that collegial environment?
Well, this scenario raise a very serious question. And I have to say, it never happened to me. If you have a member coming to you and alleging that the reason why she was less scheduled, she believes that it's because there's a discrimination issue here, this has to be taken very seriously. And I think that I would say that. I would acknowledge that. I would say to this member, listen, this is a serious concern. Please explain to me what are the facts, or where this impression or feeling you have is coming from. And you take that into consideration, and I would tell this person that I would look into it seriously and come back to her. There could be a lot of factors. It could be, if she says, I offer 4 days a week and I'm scheduled 2 days a week, maybe she was expecting 4, but the board has proposed 2. Or it could be a caseload issue. There could be a reduction in caseload. It could be less application in the region this member is. There could be all kinds of reasons, but I would be very, very careful in dealing with the allegation, and I would look into it seriously and come back to the member. If it is true that there's some issue in scheduling because she's speaking with an accent and she is not white, that means that your organization has a problem, and you have to address it. So that would be the way I would approach it, because it's, your organization has to be able to be open and inclusive. It's a value that has to be fostered.
So Gary, this is a tough scenario in that you don't know if there's any other corroborating information. You only have, her perspective and her sense of feeling how she's been treated. And I think I had said 4 hearing days a month. It's 4 hearing days a week to 2. So clarifying that fact, how do you approach this kind of situation, and again, what it may speak to about the broader culture and collegiality of the board?
I think there are the 2 issues. One is the factual objective issue, the process issue. What is the procedure, the criteria for scheduling? And the other issue is the personal one, the human rights allegation, and to check into that. So really, for the first issue, every tribunal with part-time members that are scheduled on an ad hoc as opposed to 1 week every single month regular basis, if you just schedule ad hoc, selecting members as they are available, this is a common concern for many members in part-time tribunals. Some may feel unfairly treated. So this member may not be the only member who feels unfairly treated when it comes to scheduling. The difference is, and it's a big difference, is this member thinks the reason for that differential treatment is a human rights discrimination reason. And so, yes, that has to be looked into. It puts a very different nature on what is otherwise, I would suggest, maybe a fairly common complaint in a tribunal with many part-time members who are just called upon now and then. We do need a system, a transparent system in place about scheduling with criteria. I believe the tribunal I've been with only for a year, the License Appeal Tribunal, has a system where we mark down when a member has been called and what their answer has been if they've said no. So if a member says, I don't have enough work, we actually could point to statistics that say, we actually contacted you 5 times in the last few months, and you said that you were not available.
So, Linda, it speaks to a couple of different responses. I mean, one is on transparency and scheduling. If it turns out that everyone is getting about half the days they're looking for, it certainly doesn't appear that there's any differential treatment. It can also speak to whether mentorship and part of that collegiality differs depending on the community someone comes from. And if someone is viewing themselves as an outsider, is that something that there are other strategies or approaches to creating a culture that is inclusive and welcoming at the outset? So is this a symptom of an individual issue, a greater problem, or simply a institutional process like scheduling as you read over the scenario?
Well, if you don't, I think, dig down to the individual level and find out what really, what the motivations and expectations are of the member. If you don't fully understand what their expectations were when they accepted the position as a member, then you're going to constantly be coping with these kinds of problems. If a part-time member accepts an appointment on the basis that there will be 4 days of work a week, and that's what they're relying on to feed their family and pay their rent, then if they're reduced to 2 days a week, they have a real problem personally. And members who have those kinds of problems are not going to stay. And if they're really good members, you're then, the tribunal's weaker. So mentorship can play a role here. The problem notes her as being standoffish to members. If it's a very small tribunal and there's a culture of personality type, which is gregarious and outgoing and talkative, then the person who tends to be shyer and less certain as they enter the new environment may appear to be standoffish for a while just because they're not of the same personality type. And you want to make sure, in that case, I think the mentorship is key to overcoming that. But clear expectations right at the outset, and it's very tough to give for the part-time members, unless they're organized in a mark off this week, we're going to keep you busy for that week.
Right.
And very few of the tribunals, as they reflect their specialization, can make that kind of commitment.
But let's assume you've done what can be done, and moving off this scenario simply to the general concern that will come up from time to time, that there is a member who is unhappy, who is just not either getting the level of work they want, not getting the quality of experience, or just because of personality type is confrontational and not susceptible to picking up on messages, whether implicit or explicit, about expectations of the board, the rogue member. How do you respond to that kind of challenge? And Linda, we'll stay with you for this.
If the rogue part, because we're dealing with people that come from such diverse backgrounds, so pulling them together as a team can be a real challenge. If we're dealing with rogue in the sense that they are disruptive, exhibiting negative workplace behavior, they're reacting negatively to the statements of core values, and then you try and manage it through performance assessment, you try and spend time with them, but in the end, if they are truly rogue and truly disruptive, then the time comes for reappointment and they don't get reappointed because they're such a negative factor in the workplace. And you have to be careful not to create an impression that, well, if you don't do what Linda wants, you're gone, right? It has to be founded on a principled basis that here are the expectations. This is what is expected, and this is how your performance is assessed. In terms of the rogue, you hope that the benefits of the kinds of principles that you're talking about and the values that you're espousing in the context of the job you have to do serving the public, because the only reason they're there is to serve the public. That eventually the good will start to outweigh the bad, and they will see the advantage of the core values. It's no different in any other workplace, right? There are going to be rogues in every workplace. The question is, do they have skills that you really need? And it's a challenge to find where those skills can best be applied. And when you're talking about order and council members, there are limited jobs you can assign them to.
This is right. So, Gary, have you had experience with a successful or unsuccessful course of action in response to the rogue member?
I think the rogue member,
Having been a rogue member yourself, you bring lots of experience to this.
Yes, it takes one to know one, obviously, but I think dealing with a rogue member, and I would say a rogue member at the most, probably in my experience, is a member who is very, very opinionated, for example,
right,
or who resists guidelines or consistency initiatives, or maybe resists suggestions to change or improve their draft reasons. That's probably the extent, luckily, of my experience with rogue members. And really, there is something that is common, I think, to all members that we may describe as rogue. And that is those members' reliance on adjudicative independence to justify their resistance to being, quote, managed or led or trained or improved or anything like that. And this goes to Linda's point about you're there to provide a public service. It was a great discussion we had at the executive committee at Social Justice Tribunals Ontario. We were talking about this issue, and what Executive Chair Michael Gottow reminded us is that the adjudicative independence imperative, that's not a right of the member. That's a right of the parties. That's the right of the public. And so, it is not a member, we cannot have members asserting adjudicative independence as a defense or a shield against following guidelines unless there's a reason not to follow the guidelines, against professional development, against collegiality initiatives. A member cannot say, you said I was rude in the hearing room. Well, that's the kind of member I am. That's the kind of hearing I run. And I am independent, and I'm entitled to run the kind of hearing that I do. You cannot have members relying on independence like that. And I think that is at the core of justification, falsely, that rogue members have, and it has to be dealt with head on.
And Suzanne, have you had an experience of dealing with it head on?
Well, to reassure your audience, I met a lot of members in my life, and I didn't have really to deal with a member who was absolutely not interested in following direction. Maybe one, two, not many more than that. And I think the reason for that is, and I think we can talk about this environment. Our members are generally quite proud to be appointed on a board. They have past interview, they waited for that, they are hoping to be appointed, and they are there for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, and they know that they have to, in general, I would say the vast majority of them, they have to deal with expectations. So the vast majority of them that I've worked with are open to suggestion, open to improve their work, and to be able to cooperate and collaborate. So this being said, the rogue member, I agree completely with Gary, that could be a misunderstanding of the role. There could be also, there's a place for an open discussion with the member. You say, there's expectation. I come back to my comment before. There's rules, and there's reason why there's rules. And I'm going to explain to you why there's rules, and why it's important that we all follow them. And we can hope that this person will slowly come on board. Is it also that there's a certain level of discomfort with the function, that don't feel comfortable in the role? You have to explore that too. Maybe I'm like that, you realize that the member is like that because doesn't know how to deal with the different situation that comes every day, and some cases and some difficulty in the hearing room, and it's it's a reaction to the change and the novelty and the difficulty, because it's a tough job to be a member. So I would explore that on the personal level.
So we have time for just one last scenario, but it's a scenario that flips over that spirit of mentorship and collegiality from the rogue member to the member in trouble, but who may not be able to voice the needs that he or she has. So here's the scenario. Full-time member who's been a productive and well-liked member of the tribunal since his appointment, after retiring from a public service career, has started to show some early signs of dementia. He's become forgetful, has begun repeating questions to parties, and when his health was raised in passing by a fellow member in the lounge, he reacted angrily that he was fine and politely asked that the colleague respect his privacy. How do you respond to this kind of situation, again, at a relatively early point before there's really an evidence of a performance problem, but where the signs are pointing to that unfolding down the road? What experience or instincts would you bring to this kind of situation? And Linda, maybe we'll start with you this time.
Well, as a person who practiced a lot before tribunals, I focus first on the fact that this is the member's job to adjudicate requires a very high level of functioning. There's no nodding off at 2 o'clock in the afternoon because you've had a heavy lunch. You have to be on the job and alert and paying attention and to sustain that. I would not delay reacting to this one, but on the other hand, you have to make sure you're not getting ahead of things. So panels, sitting with another member, would be my first instinct, so that if the member who's having some difficulty shows it in the hearing room, there is someone else who can make sure that at least those parties have a fair hearing at that time. So we don't negatively impact the parties who are, we think of the member being assigned to a case, but in fact, the member's assigned to deal with parties.
Right.
And so we have to start by ensuring the parties are protected. So assign a panel so that there is someone else in the room who can make sure there's a fair hearing if the member shows some signs. And recognizing that the particular medical condition here is not going to be consistently observed. You know, it's not like he's gonna limp all the time, so everyone can see the limp. You may have days when the person functions at a very high level and other days when they don't function so well. You look at your caseload and see whether there are some things that can be done in written hearings, in desktop. You find a role there. And communication, going back to Gary's first point, communication is absolutely key. If you find some, that the members of the panel sitting with the individual are affirming, and you start to get the complaints from the bar, such as, I was really surprised to see Mr. So-and-so assigned to this case because it's going to serve as a precedent and it was very complex, then you know you really have to deal with an issue of perhaps an inability to maintain the standard of conduct that you want in the hearing room. And then you will find that that individual may have many other skills that you can use well. They may be the best mentor you can find, right? And they may be the person that people who won't listen to anybody else will in fact listen to. So you maintain the utility, and I can sound very selfish about this, you use the members as well as you can to get the value for the tribunal and for the caseload that you possibly can. And none of us can fight aging particularly well. It will happen to all of us.
Right.
And we tend to attract, by virtue of the system we have, we tend to attract people in their second careers or even third careers. And so you have to identify skill sets and, but my first reaction to this was we have to first protect the parties. So how do I do that?
So, Suzanne, let me turn to you. And again, the challenge here, I think, is also the member's prickliness, understandably, about the privacy of his own condition. Assuming you agree, and I saw you nodding as Linda was talking about, finding a different role or some other way to value the member, and you take that course, do you disclose it to the member, the reasons why, or do you not want to confront what clearly is a difficult personal issue? And if you don't disclose it, is that being fair to the member who's maybe being transferred out of a hearing role without really having a chance to respond? It may have been a reaction to medication as opposed to something ongoing, that sort of thing.
Well, my reaction to the scenario is that, first of all, it's a very sad situation, and I would be tempted to, I would gear on this, I would look into the side of the parties, but I would think about the member too. He has raised his privacy, and it's important to respect that. On the other end, I have a responsibility to the party. So I would try to gather some information. If I observe myself something, that's easier. So I would invite the member to coffee and have a chat. How are you doing?
Right.
I've seen this. Is there anything that I should know? I don't need to know the why. I don't need to know the medical condition. It's for him or her to keep. It's his personal life. When it has an impact on the work, I have to deal with it. My sense is that someone facing early sign of dementia, like in this case, maybe doesn't notice that he's asking the question 3 times, but probably notice that he's forgetful. And I'm pretty sure that this person is quite scared. And if I can give him some confidence that I'm there to help and to support him through that change, because it's not going to get better. Say, listen, if you have some issues, you're not ready to talk to me about that, we can talk about it later. But if you feel you're not doing well, we can look at other options. As Linda said, well, we can look at, you can work from home, or you can work from the office if it's better for you to have the support of the staff. Let's talk about it and we'll find solution together. And if you have foster collaboration and collegiality, if we go back to our first question, and you have established yourself a good relationship with your member, my sense, and this I have experienced, not for dementia, but for other things, the members are opening up to you. They have always opened to me. I have this problem. It's a sick child. It's a sick parent. It's cancer. It's
Right.
Yeah. So when they are able to tell you that, you say, well, do you need time to write your reason? I'm going to take you off the schedule. Write your reason. Get better. And we'll do what we can. So that would be my first instinct.
So let me give the last word on this to Gary, and again, I think Suzanne makes a good point that if the culture of collegiality and mentorship has been well fostered, there's likely a pathway that is going to be providing more options to a chair than if that's not the case. But there are the rights of the individual to respect, and again, having not disclosed any condition to be treated in any way that could be perceived as adverse, even based on personal observation that isn't substantiated with the whole process, can be challenging. And I know you've seen these issues from that perspective as well. What would you do to reason through the necessary balancing?
Yeah, I think Suzanne raises a good point that we don't necessarily need to know the underlying medical condition. But what we do need to know are the limitations on your actions. What are the functional limitations because of whatever underlying medical condition you may have? And we are entitled as managers to look into those functional limitations and see how they affect the work. So this really is, again, just like the human rights and scheduling scenario, it's about 2 levels. One is the more objective, fact-based, evidence-based procedure, that kind of level, and the other one is the personal level. So clearly, that first level has to be addressed because it impacts on the work of the tribunal. And that is an evidence-based, fact-gathering kind of process. It is about being transparent and presenting those facts to the person and having, in some cases, with this person's personality, confronting that person with it. But then there is the personal level, and that is something which hopefully the collegiality, the foundation is there to be able to address this situation in a respectful and dignified way. I've experienced and heard of members who are in their 70s or 80s on their own, withdrawing, resigning. And it's a very graceful way to, they recognize some of the changes and they offer on their own. But that is the reality of, as Linda said, of the members that we have. We have many members who are in their 70s and 80s, and it's amazing how on the ball they are. It's amazing how it gives me great hope for
no, I'm looking forward
for the
to
future.
my 70s and 80s to finally figure out how to do things. So, but look, I think like so many of these scenarios, your answers reflect the mix of principles and lived experience, the instinct and commitment to the broader values, all having to work in sync. And I think you've offered both a window into the real challenges that sometimes make for there being no easy or right answer, but also the commitment to search for better answers and for better approaches, and not to wait until the dilemmas come, but to build a culture from the outset that is collegial, that is based on mentorship and assessment of performance in a way that is positive and supportive. And I think that's a great way to kick off this webinar series on ethics in administrative justice. And I know that it's going to stimulate some questions and reflections and thinking, maybe even some contrary views on those who've been tuning in. So thank you very much, Linda Tanaka, Gary Yee, Suzanne Gilbert. It's been a pleasure to learn from you, and look forward to the reactions and feedback. And thanks, of course, to the whole team that puts this together at SOAR and OPD as well. And with that, we will break until the next webinar brings us back together. So thank you again.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
sir.